So I'm changing the rear tire on this 2015 KTM 250SX. Should be pretty similar for most KTM models, just the only difference is the rear axle size. First, you'll need a clean towel. Second, you'll want some grease, preferably wheel or axle grease. You're also going to need some gloves because we're going to be using a lot of grease. Third, you're going to need some WD-40. Fourth, you'll need the appropriate size wrench for your rear axle. Some KTMs have a 27mm rear axle, but I have a newer axle and it's slightly bigger, so I'll be using a crescent wrench. Next, you're going to also want some tire levers. And finally, and most importantly, you're going to need your tube and your tire. So make sure they fit. So the first step is to remove this nut. If you're using a crescent wrench, be careful, get it really snug because these bolts are aluminum and they will strip. You can start pushing the axle out the other side. So I'm just gonna take a mallet and just start tapping it. It shouldn't be tight at all, it should just be snug. There we go. Now this axle block should come right off right there. Put it on my towel. So now to finally remove the wheel, I'm just going to grab this axle. It's punched out a little bit. Pull it out, but you want to have your hand on the tire to support the weight of it. There we go. And there you go. Simple as that. So now that I have the tire off the bike, I'm just going to go and let the air out. If you have your tube handy, they have a valve core remover right here. So that's really helpful. That'll just get all the air out right away. I'm just gonna steal that off this new tube. Flip it upside down like that, where that groove is, if you can see that. Put it on there, try to get it to hook up. The next step is removing the rim lock. That's this bolt looking thing or nut looking thing right there. I believe that's a 12. This bike has an aftermarket rim lock just for some bling, but should be a 12 all the way around. With that same 12mm wrench, you can go and undo this nut on the stem of the tube right here. So we can now start breaking the bead of the tire. That's basically just means it's sealed up against the rim. Just push on it and you'll hear it kind of pop off. It takes a little bit of force. You might get a mallet. I'm going to spray this WD-40 into the rim around the tire. That's going to let me get those tire levers in there a little bit easier. And I've got a little bit of grease around the rim lock as well as that WD-40. I just use some red and tacky. And I'm going to start sliding this tire iron in. I did pry a little bit like this just to break the bead a little bit more. But now it should slide right in there. I like to hammer around and get the bead off. This tire is having a hard time getting off, so I like to get the lever under there and just slightly tap it with a mallet and go around. Now that I've broken the bead on both sides, I'm going to go and stick a tire lever a little bit to the right or left of the rim lock. That's so later when you're taking the tire off, there'll be less tension on the tire once you pull the tire over the rim lock. I'm going to put one there. And then another one about 6 inches apart, or 6 inches from the original. I'm gonna rotate back over here to get a better grip on it because it's gonna take a decent amount of force, and then you can just start pulling it over. And then try to pin the lever under the disc if you can. And then time for the number 2. So now you have those 2 irons pinned up against the disc. You want to look for a little gap on each side. Should be about 6 inches from each, maybe 5 from each iron. This side looks a little bit better, it's a little bigger, so I'm going to try and get an iron in there. And I haven't cutting up this video, guys. It's not as easy as it looks, so don't get discouraged if it takes a few tries to ram it in there. There we go. Now I'm going to rotate it again and pull this one. Go. Not pretty or anything, but there we go. So this one in the middle will pop out, and then you want to keep looking for that gap. So here's our next gap right here. So I'm gonna put a little grease on there and try to slide that iron in there. we go. Now it's gonna get a lot easier because the tire is losing tension. And then just keep repeating. So now that I have the disc facing side of the tire popped off, I'm gonna flip it over and repeat the process. So now that you have both sides of the tire popped off, you can start and try to slide the rim out. Just pull it over. As you can see, once I pulled the rim out, the rim lock also came out. I just fell right out of this hole. And the tube is still in this old tire. So if you want to reuse the tube, pull it out just like so. The next step after you got your tire off is to inflate your tube a little bit, just so there's some pressure in it. Do a few PSI. You don't want it looking like this, like a new tube. You want it to be slightly malleable so it's a little bit easier to work on when you're installing the new tire. So your next step is to see if your new tire is directional or not. This tire is not directional, but generally there will be an arrow right here indicating which direction it goes, so you want to align that with the way your wheel spins. Now it's time to lube up the inside of the tire, and as we're going to place the new tube inside of it. So I'm just going to use some grease. So now that we have the tire all lubed up, we're going to go and slide the tube in the new tire. And if you want to be fancy, you can align the stem with the logo on the tire. So here's my Battle Cross logo, or you can do it with the Bridgestone, either way. So now that we have the tube and the tire, it's time to grab our rim. I like to face it, sprocket down first so you don't cut up your hands. And then we're gonna pull a little bit of the tube out, like a few inches like so. And then you're gonna go and find your hole. And I'm gonna put the tire on top, and I'm gonna try to get that stem to slide in there. So now that you got it in there, we can grab our nut and thread it on there. So now that we have our stem in the tire, we can go and grab our rim lock and the rim lock assembly and slide it into place. And then we can grab our nut and thread that on. As you can see, we have our rim lock on right there, just loosely. And now it's time to start pulling the tire over. Now that we have our tire sitting on top of the rim and the rim lock in, we can take our tire irons and with spoon side down, hook them over, so under the tire and on top of the rim, and try to get it slide in there. Okay, there we go. So now that we have it over the rim lock on this side, it's kind of a two-person job if you don't have a tire stand. So you need to get a little bit of the other parts of the tire beaded so there's tension to hold it onto the rim lock. Without other tension or another person holding the tire irons, it's going to want to pop out. But once you get a little bit of the tire on, it'll seat right in there and it can't go anywhere. So we're just going to work our way around the tire. I'll grab this iron. So now you want to fill the tire up with air. Ideally, to get it to bead, which means to get the bead of the tire to seal up against the rim, you want to use an air compressor and fill it as fast as possible. But I'm lazy right now, so I'm just going to be using a bike pump. So you want to probably fill it up to maybe 40. I go about 30 because I don't want to risk popping the tube. But that's just going to set the bead in place on the tire. And then once we have that, once it's beaded, we'll deflate the tire to the proper PSI. So the next step is to deflate the tire to the proper PSI. I'm gonna do around 12 PSI just to begin with. The next step is to check if your tire is beaded properly. So as you can see, mine is, because this bead runs all the way around the tire and is parallel to the rim, or concentric with the rim. But if it's not and your tire is beaded incorrectly, you'll see this line dip down and go under the rim and come out somewhere else. And in that case, it won't be parallel. And to fix that, you're gonna wanna deflate the tire and try to pull it back. Next step is to tighten the rim lock. So the next step, once your tire's all done, you're gonna wanna go and pry your brake pads apart a little bit. Mine look good, but I'm using a tire iron. You can use a flat blade screwdriver. Don't press too hard. You just wanna press that piston in a little bit. Next, I'm gonna take my axle block and put it back on this side where we found it. And now we're gonna slide our wheel up. Be careful not to bump the disc too much. Now we're just gonna try to slide it up there and in between those pads. To slide in the axle, we just got it down a little bit because it's hard to film with one hand on camera. But now we're just gonna slide it through the sprocket side and all the way through the other side and through the axle block. Next, we're gonna put the nut on, just loosely. Next, since I have the axle in the hand tight, I can kind of wiggle it out of there and slide this side of the wheel forward. That gives me some extra room to get the chain on. Now I can just go like so. Then I'm gonna slide it back and hammer that axle back in. Next, we're gonna put a towel in between the chain and sprocket and slide it to pull the wheel forward. With the wheel still pulled back, we can finally tighten the axle nut. There's the finished product. It was definitely a two-hand job. If you're watching other videos and it seems effortless, it's not effortless. This took me about 30 minutes and I've done plenty of tires. And especially without a tire stand, you're gonna wanna have two people. Just for the sheer force you're gonna need to be pulling the tire over. And especially if you're using a hard compound like this tire, it's gonna make it much more difficult. So keep that in mind and don't get discouraged. It's kind of a learning curve. And let me know if you guys like this video and I'll keep doing more little upgrades on this bike.